Before we take a look at this in action, I want to briefly take a look at the function that takes care of serving up these files. So I'm going to go to the file.inc file, which is in the includes folder in our Drupal site. And we're going to take a look at the file download function. Now, when somebody accesses a file that's in the private file directory, what happens is that Drupal will rewrite the URL of that path request to go to a Drupal page at system/file. So after that path is where the file name is located, and that's what gets passed to the hook file download that we were just talking about. The effect of this basically is that whenever that file gets called, an actual Drupal page is getting called. And so this is the page handler for that particular page. And let's take a look at this. So we're getting the arguments that are being passed to this menu callback. We're getting the scheme from those arguments. Because remember that there's a scheme : / at the beginning of a URI. So what arguments do is take everything that's in between the slashes. So the first item in that array, if we're splitting up the arguments into an array, is going to be the scheme. We're imploding all those arguments with a slash and then adding the : / back, which builds a valid URI. We're making sure that the stream wrapper is valid and that the file actually exists. And if so, we're going to continue on. If not, we're going to return a Drupal not found. So this is good for troubleshooting, knowing that you can get a Drupal not found if the file doesn't exist or the URI isn't properly configured. We're starting out with a blank headers array, and then we're going to loop through the file download hooks using module implements. And module implements is a way to trigger a hook. And it's looping through all of the modules that implement this particular hook. It builds the function name, and it runs the function. It checks to see if the result is -1, and if so, it returns Drupal access denied, which is our 403 page. So if we're getting an access denied on a private file download, it's because one of the hook file download functions is returning a -1. If it passes that, and we get some form of header from the return value from our hooks, and it's an array, then we're going to go ahead and merge it with any previous headers that have been set by other hook functions into our headers variable. Another important part here is that once all of this is complete, it checks to see if there are any headers that are set, and if so, it takes care of transferring the file. If not, then it'll exit out of this and return a Drupal not found. So the problem here is that if our module doesn't take care of setting headers, then we could end up with a Drupal not found and be very confused as to why that's happening, because even if our file exists, if our function, our hook file download function, doesn't take care of setting those headers, we'll get a Drupal not found anyway. Let's go ahead and dig just a little bit deeper and take a look at this file transfer function. I'm going to go ahead and control click it to jump to the definition. And here we go. So this takes two parameters, the URI and the headers. Then we loop through the headers and build them out so that they're in a sendable format with our file. We grab the scheme. We do a couple checks to make sure that the scheme exists and it's valid, and that we can open the file. If we can, then this simple loop happens right here, and this is where our file gets sent to the browser. So while we haven't reached the end of the file, we're just going to print out a certain part of the file. So everything from the current pointer in the file plus 124 byte chunk after that. And then once this is done printing out, it'll close. If this doesn't pass, it's going to go ahead and return a Drupal not found. So here's one more place where we can get a 404 error even if our file exists, because there's something happening here that's not right with the permissions for our file. And then it will Drupal exit, which is actually shutting down the script. And this won't return any value, it will just end, which should be okay as long as we set the headers and then printed out our file. So you can imagine that this takes a bit of processing power. Instead of simply grabbing the file and sending that out, we're running the file through this script, which means that our script is running potentially for a really long time if we have a big file. So a little later I'm going to talk about a module that you can get for Apache that will allow you to basically sidestep this process and serve the file through Apache even though we have just begun the processing through the PHP script. Okay, now that we've dug in a little bit and you can see that it's not really rocket science, let's go ahead and take a look at it in action. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the browser and upload a couple of files. Now we can just go to the unmanaged file example page, which again is at assets/unmanaged. All of our same page paths exist. The only thing that has changed is the file path where our file gets saved to and how the file gets delivered through the browser. So I'm just going to upload a couple of files here. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at it displaying in the browser. And we can go to assets/unmanaged/view right here to view the pictures. Okay, so here we go. We're seeing the thumbnails. This means that our files are getting delivered properly. And if we jump to our file directory and go down to our default folder, files, private. Now remember that we're saving our files now in the private directory, which is what we set on the media settings page. So we set it to default/file/private. So in here, we should see our assets folder being created, and then our unmanaged folder, which was a subfolder of our assets folder, and then our images here. So these are the files that are being served through our PHP script.